I will call this meeting of the Town Council of Los Gatos of December 21st to order. And if you could roll our video, please.
The public is welcome to participate at Town Council meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meetings is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. At each meeting, the following expectations of civil conduct shall apply. 1. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the council agenda. 2. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at council meetings. 3. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at Town Council meetings. 4. All public comments at the Town Council meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. 5. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the mayor may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the council exiting the chamber. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the council would return to the chamber and the mayor would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a council meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code Section 403. These expectations of conduct also apply to meetings of all town boards, committees, and commissions.
Thank you. And if you could do a roll call for me, please.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Risto. And my apologies, Vice Mayor Risto.
Still here.
Here. Councilmember Hudis.
Here.
Councilmember Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Badami. Mayor and Chair Rennie.
Here. All right, thank you. So the first item on our business is to announce again our appointment of the boards and commissions from last week that were not clearly appointed. So please do that.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Due to the technical difficulties experienced with Zoom at the December 14th, 7 p.m. Council meeting, we are re-announcing the appointments to the boards, commissions, and committees. 5 applicants were interviewed and Council could appoint up to 4 to the Arts and Culture Commission. 1 applicant was interviewed and Council could appoint up to 1 to the Community Health and Senior Services Commission. 5 applicants were interviewed and Council could appoint up to 3 positions to the Complete Streets and Transportation Commission. 1 applicant was interviewed and Council could appoint up to 1 to the General Plan Committee. 4 applicants were interviewed and Council could appoint up to 2 to the Library Board. 2 applicants were interviewed and Council could appoint up to 2 to the Parks Commission. 1 applicant was interviewed and Council could appoint up to 1 to the Personnel Board. 3 applicants were interviewed and Council could appoint up to 2 to the Planning Commission. Additionally, there is 1 appointment to be made for the Finance Commission. Per Town Code, each council member appoints 1 commissioner. For 2022, the appointment is to be made by Mayor Rennie. Mayor Rennie separately interviewed 3 applicants for the Finance Commission. Upon completion of the appointment process, Council may direct the town clerk to re-advertise for any open positions. The following appointments were made. Amy Fashnot to the Arts and Culture Commission unanimously. Tom Spilsbury to the Arts and Culture Commission unanimously. Ann Lamborn to the Arts and Culture Commission with 4 votes by Badami, Hudas, Risto, and Syak. Ann Lamborn with 4 votes by Badami, Hudas, Risto, and Syak. Claudia Denker received 2 votes by Rennie and Syak. For the Community Health and Senior Services Commission, Eleanor Yick was appointed unanimously. For the Complete Streets and Transportation Committee, Sherry Finale Binkley was appointed with 3 votes by Badami, Hudas, and Risto. Ali Miano was appointed with 4 votes by Badami, Rennie, Risto, and Syak. Jeff Thompson was appointed unanimously. Jean-Marc Blanchard received no votes, and Cindy Walker received 2 votes by Rennie and Syak. For the Finance Commission, Ron Dickel is appointed by Mayor Rennie. For the General Plan Committee, Susan Burnett is appointed unanimously. For the Library Board, Lydia Norcia is appointed with 3 votes from Hudas, Rennie, and Risto. Leticia Ramos Medeiros was appointed unanimously. Claudia Denker received 1 vote from Badami. For the Parks Commission, Jean-Marc Blanchard and Matthew Ober were both appointed unanimously. For the Personnel Board, Ed Matchik was appointed unanimously. For the Planning Commission, Kylie Clark was appointed with 3 votes from Rennie, Risto, and Syak. Steve Raspy was appointed with 4 votes from Badami, Hudas, Rennie, and Syak. Chris Ray received 1 vote from Badami. And Mayor, we do have outstanding vacancies. So if the council would so like, we could do a mid-year recruitment along with the Youth Commission in the spring.
And I think we would like to do that. Do you need a motion or something from the council, or?
No.
Okay. I think we would like to do a mid-year recruitment, please.
So we'll do a mid-year recruitment for the Building Board of Appeals. We have 2 openings. Community Health and Senior Services, we have 2 openings. Historic Preservation, we have 1 opening because Steve Raspy was on Historic, and with his appointment to the Planning Commission, his position on Historic Preservation is now surrendered. We have 1 opening on the Parks Commission, and we have 1 opening on the Personnel Board. So we will include those at the mid-year recruitment with the Youth Commission. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for much more clarity on that from last week. So next up is council matters. Let's start with Councilmember Hudas today. Let us know what you've been doing.
Well, it's been a light couple of weeks, other than the council meeting that we had to make the appointments. I had 1 meeting, which was the Finance Commission on, I believe it was on the 13th, where we reviewed the financial statements, the audited financial statements of the town for a second time, and made some comments and recommendations.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you, Mayor. Let's see, on the 8th, I attended the West Valley Sanitation District meeting, which wrapped us up for the year. And I was pleased to see I'm reappointed for next year for continuity, so thank you. I attended the Complete Streets monthly meeting where there was discussion about the street safety plan, among other things. On the 10th, there's a series of 3 Housing Matters webinars that were put on by state senators, and I was only able to attend the middle one, which was about the legal and regulatory framework, talking about kind of the tension between local control and state laws. And it was quite interesting. So I know that's recorded. I don't know if we have access to share any of those, or at least to share them with other council members who may have missed them. But I think that would be helpful to a lot of people. I attended the Finance Commission meeting on the 14th. I attended the Democracy Tent meeting on the 14th. And I've spoken with several residents about bike and pedestrian improvements on Shannon Road, on Winchester, and just in general with the Connect Los Gatos, and just getting some, a variety of feedback. I think it'll take people a while to get used to some of the changes, but from the perspective of parents and children and bike commuters, the positive feedback is pretty overwhelming. Thank you. Did we lose our mayor?
I think we lost our mayor, but I see him in the attendees list.
I am back. I apologize. I bumped my power cord and it did a weird reset. And then I heard most of what Vice Mayor Risto had to say, but as an attendee. So I'm back as a panelist. So next up, Councilmember Sack.
Thank you, Mayor. In addition to also attending the Cal Cities State Senator Housing Matters panel discussion, I attended the swearing-in ceremony in attendance with the mayor of our newest sworn officers. Congratulations and welcome to Los Gatos. And also participated in the Cities Association Executive Committee wrap-up of the year and just planning for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Sack. And for me, the mayor, I attended on 12/8 the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board. It was a bit light. We were planning to work on our rate setting, but with delays in PG&E's rate setting, ours got delayed, so it was a little bit light there. On 12/9, the BACMed Bay Area Air Quality Management District Legislative Committee met, and we reviewed the California budget and how it affected dollars coming into the air district. We looked at the updates, the legislative updates that were relevant to BACMed also. On 12/9, the VTA PAC met. Interestingly, we, during that meeting, got a threat of sorts that is being referred to criminal prosecution, actually. Somebody mentioned in their somebody who speaks all the time mentioned their gun, and that was a red flag, considering we've had shootings at VTA before. And I actually received a subpoena today to go down to the court next week on that matter. And let's see, on 12/10, the West Valley Community Services Parket Market was in Los Gatos for an open house that I stopped by to see. West Valley Community Services is also one of the organizations that we give grants to multiple times recently. And on 12/13, our Finance Commission reviewed the CAFR, although we have a new name for it, but CAFR's still stuck in my head. And on 12/15, the BACMed board, the last one was a legislative committee. This time the board met, and we reviewed updates and voted for a more stringent Rule 2.5, which is about cancer risk indicators. And we changed the limit from 6 in 1 million, from 10 in 1 million for communities already overburdened by pollution. On 12/16, the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance Committee met, and we discussed updates to our investment policy, and also reviewed our prepay bond that went into effect that actually saves us some money. On 12/16, also, I attended the swearing in, as was mentioned, of 5 new officers. Very exciting. They are recently out of the academy. Some just coming out of the academy, some just finishing our training here So we have 5 new young officers, very exciting, and 1 new dispatcher also. On 12/17, the senior committee, subcommittee of the senior committee that I'm on, we met and did some work. And on 12/18, I attended the Reefs Across America at Los Gatos Memorial Park. My job was to actually give a plaque thanking the park for sponsoring the Reefs Across America, which is a way to thank and honor and remember veterans. And then on 12/18, I also attended kind of a holiday party get together for the Silicon Valley Youth Climate Action Group in Cupertino. And that's it for me. And next, manager matters, please.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. We have a couple of announcements for you this evening. First of all, we are continuing to offer holiday valet parking downtown. So please come and finish your holiday shopping at downtown Los Gatos. Second, we are going to be doing COVID testing, free COVID testing on Thursday, the 23rd of December. It will be at our Adult Recreation Center. There are plenty of appointments, so please come and get your free COVID test. And then finally, town offices will be closed from December 23rd through the 2nd of January. The library will be closed from December 24th through the 26th, and will be open for a few days and then closed again for New Year's from December 31st through the 2nd of January. During this time, our online permitting for building and planning will be accepting applications. However, staff will not be able to respond to those new applications until after the first of the year. Happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you for that update. Next is our consent calendar, which consists of items 1 through 15. Would any member of council wish to pull an item? Councilmember Hudis.
Yes, I'd like to pull item 2, please.
Item 2.
The minutes from the December 7th study session.
Okay. Is it something we could take care of quickly? Is it a question, or would you like to amend them? Or
I had a question about the form of minutes for the study session.
okay. I guess let's put that at the end. That's our usual way of doing it. So I'll move to item 2 after item 20. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other council members wish to pull anything? I do not see any hands. So let me go to the public. Would any member of the public wish to comment on items on the consent calendar, items 1 through 15? I do not see any hands coming up. I'll give another couple seconds here. I don't see any hands. So I'll close the public comments, and Councilmember Risto, hopefully you have a motion for me.
I do. I move to approve the consent calendar, item 1, and then items 3 through 15.
All right. Do I have a second? A second from Councilmember Sayak.
Yes.
Okay. And would anybody like to make any comments about the consent calendar? I see no hands. So if I could ask the clerk to, should I do the roll call, or should we have the clerk do the roll call?
Whatever you prefer.
I think Marika was doing it in the past, so I'll go ahead and do the roll call. So for the consent calendars, item 1 and 3 through 15, Councilmember Sayak.
Aye.
Councilmember Hudis.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
And I, the mayor, also vote aye. So of the 4 council members present, it passes unanimously. So next we move on to verbal communication. And so this is an opportunity for the public to address us on items that are not on tonight's agenda. Would any members of the public wish to address us? I see one person, Claudia Denker. If you could enable her, please. and you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, are you going to have a video as well, or is it just audio? Hello?
It's just audio.
Just audio. Thank you, Shelley.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay. So you know what? I'll bow out and come back at another meeting because I would like to meet you all in person with video. Okay,
All right.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I do not see any other hands raised from the public for items not on the agenda. So I'll go ahead and close verbal communications for items not on the agenda and move to other business, item 16, which is a battery power supply for the library. And I'll turn it over to staff for a report on this.
Good evening and happy holidays. Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works. In this item, we are asking for Council's approval of an agreement with Prime Electric to move forward with a battery power supply system at the library, funded through 2 grants. And so the recommendation comes with the associated budget actions. This particular project utilizes a specific government code that would allow us to work directly with a contractor in a design build type process, and that's what we're proposing. It allows us to look at the capacity and what would work best for the library building in terms of backup power and using battery that would be charged by the solar system already in place on the library. The system won't likely be big enough to power the entire library, but a key portion of it that will support the resiliency goal of the grant that we're getting from Cal OES. The other grant that we're receiving is from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and that's for the alternative power element. The resiliency, the power would aid us in doing peak shaving, load shaving, so that helps us to potentially reduce power usage and cost to the town through the project. And with that, that will conclude my report, and I'm here to answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Would council like to ask any questions before I go to the public on this one? Seeing no rush to hands, I will open up the public comment on item 16. And I'm not seeing any hands yet. Give another 2 seconds. So I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll go ahead and close public comment for item 16 and come back to council for questions or a motion. Comments too. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. I think this is an amazing project. I think it's really good to know that when we do have a power outage, we will have a place in town that is up and running. And I guess I did have a question. I apologize that I didn't ask it before, but for Director Morley or the town manager, is part of this intent so that, for example, if we have a power outage in a really hot day, that the library could then be kind of a cooling center for people that might not have air conditioning in their homes, or be able to continue their work if they're working from home, or in the winter when it's really cold, if people lose their power and the house is cold, this could be kind of an emergency refuge?
It will definitely provide an area for people who have their power out or who need to leave the hillsides in case of an emergency for some other reason. It will give them a place to go that will have power, assuming, taking from the past power shutoffs that we've experienced in and around town. We have yet to see what systems within the library will be able to power. This won't power, as I said, the entire library. So some of the heavy power using systems like HVAC may be a bit of a challenge. But we're still in the design phase, or entering the design phase, so we'll definitely be exploring options there.
Go ahead.
Follow up.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess the other thing is it was described as being somewhat modular. So this first step, as we implement this in the library, and then we further see how valuable it is or what additional power we might need, if there are additional grants or financial capacity at some point we could add on.
Absolutely. That's that will be one of the goals of the project, is to provide something that we can build on in the future.
Thank you.
And I guess I had a couple questions. So it talks about 125 kilowatt. Is that the total power the library typically uses, or is that only a portion of the typical library power?
That would just be a portion of the library power.
And that's obviously the maximum amount we would be able to do. But I saw that the number of kilowatt hours added up to only about 2.5 hours running at that rate. So I assume we might actually want to figure out a run rate below that so we can last longer.
Yeah, so that'll be part of the design, is looking at what we want to put onto this system so that it lasts a good amount of time. There's also some assumptions that go into that, because it'll be charged from solar. There'll be a little bit of recharge along the way that will help. So a little bit of math in the project as we're going through the design phase to be strategic in what we're powering so that we get the most runtime possible.
And then a second question, in the proposal from the company that we're buying it from, they mention one feature as peak shaving. If we're peak shaving, we may not have a full battery when we might need the battery, for example. And does peak shaving, is that a case when we have a potential brownout on the grid and they need more power? Is that what we're talking about? Or are we talking about every evening when the grid becomes less green, more dirty, we might put power back on? Which of these is it we might do? And are we going to have some limit to make sure we have something left in the battery in case power goes out before the next day when it can be recharged?
Good question. So the idea behind the peak shaving is to take off the high spike in power usage that the library would have in the main part of the day. That peak is an expensive part of our power bill for a facility. So by trimming that peak, it allows us to bring down the costs on that element. We can certainly work with the contractor to make sure that if there's an opportunity, if there's a potential for a brownout or a challenge with the power supply from PG&E, that we have the ability to avoid doing the peak shaving so that we don't run into that issue. And we'll add that to our list of conversation items for the project.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions from council. Would somebody wish to make a motion on this item? I guess I see Councilmember Hudas first.
Yes, I would move to approve this item as contained in the staff report, and that would include authorizing the town manager to execute an agreement for consultant services for $513,000, to authorize revenue and expenditure budget in the amount of $300,000, and to authorize revenue expenditure budget adjustments in the amount of $213,000.
Okay, thank you. Do I have a second? Councilmember Sayak, I assume you second.
Yes, I'm seconding the motion.
All right, thank you. Any further comments on the motion? I'm assuming not. I still have Councilmember Hudas and Councilmember Sayak's hands up, but I'm assuming no comments. So I'll go ahead and call the question. Councilmember Sayak?
Yes.
Councilmember Hudas?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Risto?
Aye.
And the mayor also votes aye, so this item passes unanimously. And we move on to item number 17, which is not the CAFR, but the ACFR, the 2021 ACFR. And I will turn that over to Assistant Town Manager Andrews, I assume.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Town Council. The item before you is the receipt of, as the Mayor mentioned, the annual comprehensive financial report, or we'll refer to it during our discussions as ACFR. You'll notice in the staff report that per Measure A, the annual comprehensive financial report needed to be reviewed by our Finance Commission. And you'll also notice that we brought it before the Finance Commission on 3 occasions, the first on November 8th, the second on December 6th, and then the third time on December 13th. On November 8th, it was really their opportunity to review last year's management discussion and analysis and guide staff and thoughts as we started to develop this year's management discussion and analysis. On December 6th, feedback that we got from the commission revolved around better disclosure on CARES Act and ARPA revenues, and better disclosure on non-recurring ADP expenses and things of that nature. On December 13th, we brought it again, and we had additional recommendations on the management discussion and analysis, eliminating a few duplicate factors, and also changing a little bit of the government activities expense discussion. At the conclusion of that meeting, the Finance Commission, for a unanimous vote, asked the town manager to bring the draft that you have before you in front of you. For ease of reading, everything is either highlighted in yellow, red, or strike out, so you can kind of see the evolution of the document through those discussions. And then lastly, tonight, we are also asking to adopt a resolution which confirms the June 30th, 2021 fund balances in accordance with the final audit. And with that, staff is available for any questions.
Would any council members wish to ask questions before I go to the public? Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you. These are questions that were raised during the Finance Commission, but I think it's important for the council to understand as well. And by the way, I think the Finance Commission and the whole process of the Finance Commission working with town staff has resulted in a high quality review with not as much questions and challenges and other things that we've had in the past, yet I think we've gotten much better information. And I would point out one of the results was the discussion of how ARPA funds were being accounted for. And I think it'll be very helpful when we move into mid-year and budget. There's a whole section that was added in the management discussion about ARPA funds that I think will be really, really useful to understand, since they are really one-time funds. I had 2 questions. One is really just going back to a question from last year, and this is on page 44 of the financial statements. And there's a fund called Capital Special Projects. And so I wanted to ask the question about whether capital special project operating reserves being used to pay for this year's operating budget. I believe last year there was a significant amount that was used.
So this is Gita Ungvari, Finance and Budget Manager, and I can start to answer this question. So the last fiscal year, 2020-21, the town programmed approximately $800,000 for paying one-time operational fees. But after closing the year and finalizing our report, those one-time funding wasn't needed. So we haven't used one-time funding for operations.
Thank you. That's helpful to understand that. I had another question, unless somebody else wanted to go.
I don't see any other hands up. Go ahead, Councilmember Hudis.
So this is referring to, I believe it's page 446 of the staff report, page 14 of the auditor's presentation. And it illustrates a significant gap between net cost of service and tax revenues. And that has risen in 2019, it was about even, but in 2020, there was about a $2.5 million gap. And in 2021, there's about a $3.5 million gap between what we're spending on cost of service and tax revenue. And I'm very concerned about a structural deficit and having a structural balanced budget, especially as we're undergoing labor negotiations that may strain the town's finances. So my question is, why does the net cost of service exceed revenue by $3.5 million?
And I believe Director Conway will field that question. And for the audience, the auditor does provide a presentation. Staff doesn't necessarily vet the presentation, but Director Conway?
Thank you, Arn. Hi, this is Director Conway, Steve Conway of the town. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Hudas. So as you pointed out, the slide provided by the Independence Auditor, that is slide 14 in the auditor's presentation, provided a snapshot of the net cost of service as a percentage of general tax revenues. That slide indicated a growth of the net cost from, it had grown. Net cost is, just for our audience, is the total of our expenses by function, that is to say by public safety, community development, parks and public works, the total expense minus any revenue that is raised by those functions. That is called net cost of service, which is then if you have some remaining net cost of service, you need to find other revenue sources to provide for that. That net cost of service grew about $2.1 million from the prior year. It rose from 33 million in 1920 to 35.1 million in 2021. That's just looking at the net cost. At the same time, we had revenues, the tax revenues also grew, just not as fast as the net service. They grew from 30.3 million in 1920 to 31.3 million. So the growth rate was a little less. But when we look closely at our net cost of service, it's interesting to note that because of the equation to arrive at that is basically taking the total expenses by function less revenues collected for those expenses. This graph that we had in slide 14 will include one-time revenues such as operating or capital grants. The net cost of service then, if you have some of these one-time revenues that are associated with particular functions, and mostly this occurs in parks and public works. If you have a large amount of grant monies that are one time that come in a particular year, you can see large swings in net cost of service because some years we don't receive and don't recognize as much grant revenue as other years. For instance, in 2021, the town, and then also that's our grant revenue side. And then on our expense side, we also have one-time expenses. Those are also included in this graph on slide 14. For instance, in 2021, the town incurred $500,000 of roadside fuel reduction and approximately $675,000 in 2021 in downtown revitalization expense. Both of those are non-capitalized. That means they show up as expense for the auditor's slide. So right there is another $1 million of one-time costs that weren't in 1920. These costs were added to 2021, which causes the graph to get a little out of whack, but they are explainable. So in addition to that, there was a growth of these one-time expenses. There was also $1.3 million less of grant revenue that was recognized in 2020-21 versus 2019-20. The grant revenue decrease also is portrayed in the auditor's slide because the grant revenue would be a revenue that would be reduce the net cost of service. So if you have lower grant revenues, you're going to have a higher cost of service. In thinking about this, we've had some discussions with our staff and with town management, and we feel that to avoid the effect of these one-time revenues and the variances in those and the one-time expenses, we would probably look at preparing a similar presentation that the auditor provided, but strip out some of the one-time anomalies of revenues and expense to get a more granular level of expense by function with ongoing expense and ongoing revenue, which I think would be a better presentation. Not that there's anything wrong with this particular presentation. It just needs more, explanation. And I'm sorry I had to ramble on a bit, but it's it's one of these more of a macro presentation that requires a fair amount of detail to really explain what's going on. I hope that helps.
It helps a bit. The chart on its own is still baffling and concerning. And I understand that, first of all, I'm a little surprised that an auditor is representing the town's financial statements. Normally, they rely on the town's statements themselves rather than producing their own. But this type of analysis, I think, would be really helpful to understand whether we are outspending our tax revenue. And I would hope in the future that town management could produce something like this, but maybe showing, instead of a solid bar, showing a bar with different colors showing the different types of revenues and the different types of net cost of service, so that we can understand and carve out one-time financial impacts from ongoing and recurring. And it's really the ongoing and recurring that are the concern about a structural deficit and the importance of having a structural balanced budget. So I appreciate the explanation, and I hope that in the mid-year and in the budget going forward, we can provide something like this, but is much more meaningful and useful in terms of understanding whether we're outspending the income that we're getting.
Thank you, Councilmember. I think we definitely would. We find the graph, it does invite some questions, and I think a graph with, as you explained, with maybe a little bit more detail, a little bit more clarity, and just general information in terms of comparing apples to apples would really be helpful. And I think we can do that in Finance Department. We believe we can pull that together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't see any other hands up, so let me go to the public and see if they would like to comment on this item. Don't see any hands going up. Wait another couple seconds. So doesn't look like any comments from the public, so I'll close public comment for item 17 and come back to council for more questions, a motion, or comments. Councilmember Sayak.
I have no questions or further comments based on what's already been discussed, so I'm ready to make a motion.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Director Conway and Manager for the report. I am in agreement with our colleagues that the annual comprehensive financial report every year improves itself. And I thank all those that participated in this effort. In that motion, in that regard, I'll make a motion to approve and receive the annual comprehensive financial report from fiscal year ended June 30, 2021, which is contained in attachment 1, and adopt a resolution confirming the fund balances in accordance with the fiscal year, which is in attachment 2.
All right, do I have a second? Councilmember Risto, Vice Mayor Risto?
Thank you. I'll second the motion and also second the comments made. I particularly appreciate, having watched the Finance Commission meetings, to see the kind of redlined report and see how it morphed and changed. And I appreciate the hard work of everybody to improve this report. Thank you.
All right, so I have a motion and a second. Would anybody else wish to make any comments? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and do the roll call vote. Councilmember Sack.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Yes.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
And the mayor also votes aye. So the motion passes unanimously for the 4 council members present. And we will close item number 17 and go on to item number 18, which is to adopt a CalPERS resolution and approve an employment agreement for the town attorney. And who am I turning this over to? HR Director Velasco. All right.
Yes, thank you. Good evening, Lisa Velasco, Human Resources Director. The staff report before you tonight recommends adoption of a CalPERS resolution to waive the 180-day retiree rehire waiting period and to appoint future retiree Robert Schultz as the interim town attorney while the recruitment for a permanent town attorney is being conducted. The town participates in the CalPERS retirement plan for employees. The plan has specific rules that apply when rehiring a retired CalPERS member. Specifically, CalPERS requires that an employee must wait for at least 180 days after retiring and before returning to work for a CalPERS agency. The 180-day waiting period may be waived if an agency's governing body approves a CalPERS resolution. The resolution also provides authorization for a retired employee to be rehired into a vacant position as an interim appointment while a recruitment for a permanent replacement is underway. As an appointee of the town council, the interim town attorney's term and conditions of employment are specified in an employment agreement. Adoption of the CalPERS resolution and approval of the employment agreement will allow for the continuation of time-sensitive work in the town attorney's office and ongoing support to the town council, town staff, boards, and commissions until the permanent replacement is hired. This concludes my report, and I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions from council before I go to the public? I don't see any hands up from council, so I will open the public comment from the public for item number 18. Don't see any hands up. Wait a couple seconds. Now I will go ahead and close public comment for item number 18 and come back to council for a motion or comments. Councilmember Sack.
Thank you. Couple things, but before we get into the actual motion, I don't think we've publicly thanked Rob Schultz for his commitment and his time as town manager to the town of Los Gatos. I'm sorry, town attorney. And so thank you, Rob, for your many years of service. You've been invaluable, and I think we've shared privately all the wonderful things that you've done, but I did want to acknowledge that publicly. And also just thank you for agreeing to be our interim while we look for our replacement. So with that, I will make a motion to approve the resolution before us for the CalPERS retirement plan to waive the 180-day retiree rehire wait period and to appoint Rob Schultz as our interim town attorney.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Aristo.
Thank you. I'll second the motion and second the comments made by Councilmember Sayak. Thank you so much, Mr. Schultz. And I know that many, many people in our community have expressed gratitude toward you as well.
And they've expressed disappointment that you're leaving, but we congratulate you on your impending retirement, but we won't let you go too quickly. So seeing no other comments from council, I will do the roll call vote. Vice Mayor Aristo.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayak.
Aye.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
And the mayor also votes aye, passes unanimously with the 4 council members present. Thank you. We will go on to item number 19, which is the same kind of thing it's adoption of a resolution for the California Public Employees Retirement System for an 80-day rehire wait period waiver also. And I will turn it over to Human Resources Director Velasco.
Thank you. Thank you again. Lisa Velasco, Human Resources Director. For this item, tonight staff recommends adoption of a CalPERS resolution to waive the 180-day retiree rehire waiting period, and to appoint future retiree Stephen Conway as interim finance director while the recruitment for a permanent finance director is being conducted. The town participates in the CalPERS retirement plan for employees. The plan has specific rules that apply when rehiring a retired CalPERS member. Specifically, CalPERS requires that an employee must wait for at least 180 days after retiring and before returning to work for a CalPERS agency. The 180-day waiting period may be waived if an agency's governing body approves a CalPERS resolution. The resolution also provides authorization for a retired employee to be rehired into a vacant position as an interim appointment while a recruitment for a permanent replacement is underway. Although the finance director is appointed by the town manager as specified in the town's municipal code, the CalPERS resolution template requires that the governing body approve the action to waive the 180 days and the interim appointment. Adoption of the CalPERS resolution will provide a continuation of critical oversight and contributions to financial processes, audits, and required financial reporting documents, as well as the transfer of important institutional knowledge to the new finance director. This concludes my report, and I'm again available to answer questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you. I just wanted to offer a comment about Mr. Conway. I've had the opportunity to work with many finance professionals, and Mr. Conway has done an excellent job over the years of keeping the town out of financial difficulty and avoiding unpleasant and challenging surprises in the area of financial management. And so I wanted to offer that as a comment. I'm not sure if we have to take public comments first, but I am prepared to make a motion.
I will go ahead and open public comment and see if anybody would like to comment on item 19. Not seeing any hands raised, so I will close public comment and come back to council for a motion. Councilmember Hudis, would you like to go ahead and make the motion?
Yes, sorry, get to the right page here. I move to waive the CalPERS resolution of the 180-day wait period exception and appoint Stephen Conway to the interim finance director position and while the recruitment for a permanent replacement take place. Thank you.
And let me just clarify. So you want to adopt the resolution that waives the 100-day requirement?
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Councilmember Sack.
I'll second the motion, and I'll also second the comments made by Councilmember Hudis, and just offer my thanks as well to Director Conway for 7 years of his patience in providing financial information and guidance as a council person. For someone who doesn't have that background and needed to get up to speed, I appreciate the patience and the information and the wisdom you've provided, not only to me, but to many others. So thank you, and happy retirement as well.
And I will add my thank you for all your patience and keeping the town financially sound, and congratulations on your impending retirement whenever we let you finally get out of here. So thank you. I will, let's see, if I don't see any other hands up, so I'll go ahead and do the roll call vote on this. Councilmember Sack.
Yes.
Councilmember Hudis.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Risto.
I vote aye, and I also want to thank Director Conway. I think you've left your department in very good shape. I'm glad you're staying on until we can hire a replacement, and I hope that your retirement includes lots of miles of bike riding. So thank you.
That's a good idea. Can I come too?
I would be happy to have any of you join me on any of my adventures.
All right.
Yeah, I would love it.
And I guess, thank you. And so the mayor also votes aye on that. So that is 4 ayes, unanimous vote for all council members present. So we'll close item number 19 and move on to item number 20, which is an SB 9 urgency ordinance, which I assume I'm turning over to Mr. Schultz.
Jennifer Armour actually will be making this presentation. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start with Jennifer.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. The urgency ordinance before you this evening is for implementation of Senate Bill 9, that's often referred to as SB 9. We have been watching this bill since the summer and discussing implementation with other agencies in Santa Clara County. SB 9 was passed by the California legislature on September 1st of this year and signed into law by Governor Newsom on September 16th. It takes effect on January 1st of 2022. It requires ministerial, which is staff level approval of certain housing development projects, lot splits on single family zoned parcels. So these development types include 2-unit housing development, which is 2 homes on any eligible single family residential parcel, or urban lot split, a one-time subdivision of existing single family residential parcel into 2 parcels, which would allow up to 4 units total if both items were combined. There are some exclusions allowed, including environmentally sensitive areas, historic properties and historic districts, and rental and affordable housing. As laid out in this written staff report, we also describe the different sections of the proposed urgency ordinance, and we have also provided addendum and desk item providing public comments received after the publication of the staff report. This concludes staff's presentation, but we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so I will go to Councilmember Sayak before I open public comment for any questions you may have.
Thank you. And Manager Armour, my caveat is I know that a lot of guidance still has not come out from Sacramento and HCD, but one of the questions that keeps coming to me is, does an applicant have to declare that it's an SB 9 project versus any other lot split that would be coming to you and the department in a normal fashion? And then would that then have to be recorded as an SB 9 project?
Thank you, Council Member. This urgency ordinance anticipates us implementing an interim process that would be called, there would be 2 different processes. Both would be reviewed similar to our accessory dwelling unit permits. One would be called a 2-unit housing development, and the other would be called an urban lot split. And those would be processed if somebody submitted the appropriate forms for one of those, it would be processed under these rules.
Okay, thank you. And so, and then those rules, understanding if we do a permanent ordinance, those they would still fall under this urgency ordinance on a short-term basis because the application came during that time frame, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We have this so that we can get some rules and consistency in place and give us time to work through a full process for updating the town code.
Okay, thank you.
Questions, Councilmember Hudis? You're still on mute.
Sorry about that. This may be more for the town attorney, but I understand an urgency ordinance requires a 4/5 vote. Is that correct? And we have 4 council members here. So what is the required vote for this to pass?
We all have to vote yes.
That's correct.
Okay. And maybe broader general question. What happens if this ordinance doesn't pass? What happens on January 1st?
So thank you, Council Member. I'll start, and then it may be that Director Paulson or Town Attorney Schultz may have something to add. My understanding is that we would still need to comply with the state regulations as we proceeded with new accessory dwelling unit regulations. There was a period where the state law was in effect before we were able to update our code. And so it would be a similar situation where we would be processing new applications that came in compliance with state law. What this urgency ordinance allows is for some additional clarity and consistency in processing those applications.
And that's exactly correct. You know, we would default to state law like we did, as Ms. Armour said, to state law. And really what this does, it provides staff the guidance that it's need and the direction from council to implement SB 9. But without it, we would still have to implement it the best we can without any guidance.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sayak, do you still have a question? Oh, your hand's still up. Okay, let me open up public testimony for item number 20. I see first on the list, Terry Switsky.
Step check.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor and council members, this SB 9 is the greatest thing since pre-sliced bagels. It is a godsend for simplification of minor lot splits, and to look at it in town, there's opportunities for somebody that is retiring or retired to split their lot and create a building site for their children, which would be one opportunity. The other is to split your lot and potentially sell the vacant parcel and then be able to afford to continue to live in California and pay your property taxes. So we look at it as a great opportunity to streamline some of these projects and provide benefit for town residents in a way that hasn't been, how can I say it politely, so easy in the past years. The ministerial process, the lack of CEQA review, all of those things make this very beneficial in terms of creating additional building sites. That's it.
All right. It looks like we may have a question from Councilmember Hudis.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate getting comments. You said that we view this. Is that refer to an organization that you're a part of or represent, or your profession? Could you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, just myself and other property owners that I currently represent. I'm a civil engineer and have been doing this for 35 years, most of that within the town and the city of San Jose. And over the years, it's become increasingly complex to do just a simple lot split, to the point where in some jurisdictions, it can take as much as 2 years and approaching $100,000 just to create a vacant parcel adjacent to your existing house. So this process will streamline that and provide real advantage for town residents.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And let's move to the next. David Weissman, please.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. I have a few suggestions on the draft ordinance. Number one, if we as a town are truly serious about increasing our supply of below market housing, then I think that we need a deed restriction on any new subdivision that is done under SB 9. Our ordinance should clearly state that any new units being built must be for the income restricted. It is time that we put our money where our mouth is. Otherwise, we will only get more market rate or above new housing, which defeats the main purpose of SB 9. And in that situation, there is no way that we will meet our state mandated RENA quotas for below market housing, which could have serious financial consequences for that part of our town's funding that comes from Sacramento. According to a recent articles in the Mercury News, our state's Attorney General is already discussing the creation of a grand jury that would look into jurisdictions that are not meeting their state mandated RENA numbers for below market units. For comment number 2, I ask that you look at the very top of page 9 of the draft ordinance, which is also page 505 in your packet. This is a section on intent to occupy. Staff's suggested wording is that an applicant shall sign an affidavit that they intend to occupy one of the newly created parcels as their principal residence for a minimum of 3 years from the date of approval of the lot split. I suggest that the 3-year clock should start upon issuance of an occupancy permit, not the lot split, since I know of several instances where more than 3 years have passed between a lot split and the actual start of the building. Indeed, this 3-year period was added to SB 9 to decrease the potential for developer speculation abuse. Under staff's proposed language, half of the town could apply tomorrow for a lot split just to get the clock moving, even in the absence of any intent to actually build. And in the same section, I believe that the ordinance should actually spell out the possible consequences if the applicant violates their signed affidavit, since policing this provision will be difficult. I also think that specific possible exceptions to this 3-year clock, such as death, grave illness, etc., should be included, and a stated means by which one can appeal this 3-year clock. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. I do not see any hands up for questions. And I do, Councilmember Hudis, but I think we lost him already. Was that a question for Mr. Weissman?
No, it was a question for staff, but it looks like you've got other public speakers. So.
Oh, shall I go on and finish with the other public speakers then?
Yeah.
All right. So if we could have the Safai Design Group.
Hi, thank you for allowing this, and thank you for your time tonight. Just had a question for the staff, and just to kind of confirm, I'm a designer that a few projects that are going to come into the town next year. So I just wanted to make sure that I understand the resolution clearly. The 2-story residences and development projects that were for a single family residence, not necessarily under the SB 9 subdivision plan. I do realize that you used to have a hearing process for those. I wanted to know if this is still the case under submissions post for January 1st or not. Secondly, if those floor area limits and anything will change due to the lot splits, and how does that affect the maximum allowable built area for those projects? I know that I do realize that the setbacks will need to be readjusted based on the location and the zoning. Also, I wanted to make sure and confirm that the second dwelling unit will follow the California legislation on the 4-foot setbacks. This specifically, I have 2 projects that are coming in that are on the HR zone in the I guess the sloped areas of Los Gatos. So I wanted to know if that 4-foot setback is applicable to them as well or no. Thank you very much and have a wonderful holiday.
Thank you. So we will take all public comment and then see if staff has responses to some of these. So I don't see any questions for you. So I will go on to the next speaker, Tony Jeans. Go ahead, Tony. I believe you're unmuted. Unmuted, but we're not hearing you. Maybe your mic is not plugged in. Unfortunately, it's not working. Maybe we could try putting him back in attendees and pull him back into speaking. Tony, try unmuting yourself again and speaking. Still muted now. Unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Something's wrong with your mic, it seems like. Unfortunately, it looks like it's not going to work for us. I guess we will have to move on. And I don't see any other hands up now. So I'll come back to council. Would council like to ask any questions related to things we've heard or otherwise? Councilmember Sayak.
Thank you, Mayor. And so this question to staff, there were two suggestions that were provided by Dr. Weissman. The first with regard to a deed restriction on any homes that are built with SB 9 and whether we can change the 3 years from issuance of an occupancy. So just wanted to see if staff had any thoughts on those, if those were to be included, if there would be any unintended consequences that we are not aware of.
Thank you, Council Member. I do believe that we have the ability to add additional restrictions or modify in some way related to what was suggested. I'll have to take a quick look at what the law actually says in terms of the 3 years. I believe that language was based on the state law. I'll let Director Paulson jump in. Looks like he might have something to add.
Yes, thank you. Joel Paulson, Community Development Director. So your two questions, Councilmember Sayak, we can add language relating to occupancy. I think it's important for everyone to know that the language doesn't have any teeth. It says they intend to occupy. So there's no ramifications if someone doesn't occupy. So we're going to do the affidavit. We're anticipating for a number of areas, and potentially this one, that we'll see modifications coming through the legislature for the next few years, like we saw with ADUs. In relation to deed restricting, our current BMP requirements aren't triggered until you have 5 or more units. The way the urgency ordinance is currently written, we'd be looking at a maximum of 4 units between 2 lots, so there'll be 2 on each lot max. So it wouldn't trigger our objective BMP requirements. We could potentially look at doing a nexus study to try to allow that. There's also some language, and I don't remember the exact language, but it has to do with if we have any objective standards or regulations that render the project economically infeasible, then we're going to have a hard time imposing those absent any really solid background information regarding affordability.
Okay. And if I may, Mayor, I do have a follow-up to that. The question, now that we're talking about deed restriction, with our BMPs, it's very clear what those price points are based on what we're trying to target. And so as we're talking through this, I guess my follow-up question was going to be, at what price point do we put the restriction on? Because we're, as you know, that there's different elements to choosing it, and we tie it to income levels. And so talking it through, it sounds like it may be somewhat difficult because we don't have a nexus study to tie it to our BMPs. Am I assuming that correctly, Director Paulson?
That'd be my initial thoughts. We've had this conversation in multiple venues around the general plan, trying to figure out how we can get to those lower affordability levels. Currently, our BMP requirements are for moderate and low. And so those are the two areas that our ordinance currently targets. But ultimately, again, this doesn't reach the 5-unit threshold. So I think it would be difficult from a legal perspective to impose that without any further study. Not sure if Mr. Schultz has any additional input on that, but that's where we're at currently. As you mentioned, someone mentioned before, we're hoping for some further guidance from State Department of Housing and Community Development. They're tentatively hoping to get that out to folks in February of next year. And so we're hoping to get some clarity on a number of issues and potentially even this issue.
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Mr. Paulson said is that, under SB 9, you can set your own objective standards, your objective design standards. Those things all allow that, the objective subdivision standards. But it also does state that you can't impose standards that would preclude the construction of any units. And so that's going to be the argument that we would really have to study and look at in more detail to see how we would be able to come up with deed restrictions that would not preclude the construction of additional units. And that's going to be the argument, especially if we try to say it was going to be extremely low or some other. The good thing about this is only a 40-day or 45-day ordinance. So it certainly is something when we come back in 45 days that staff can look at, and hopefully there'll be a little bit more guidance from other towns and cities are doing, and we can research that issue. I can't find anybody that has done the urgency ordinance at this point in time that's imposing those type of conditions, but that doesn't mean, other cities and towns aren't looking at it. It's just to try to do it tonight, I don't believe would be beneficial and it'd probably result in a challenge.
Thank you.
I have two follow-ups then on that. I thought I saw that Los Altos Hills passed a affordable only tied to SB 9. Are we implying that we don't think that was really legal because they didn't have a nexus study?
I'd have to look at theirs and also look at their guidelines for their regular BMP units and see how they did it. But that's something we certainly could look at. I haven't looked at it in depth.
And second part of the question, our ADUs, we get counted in our affordability count in our arena because they are small. If we limited the units to 800 square feet but didn't have a deed restriction on them, wouldn't we get credit then for moderate priced affordable units?
Thank you, Mayor. So that's something that will be determined as we go through the housing element update. So currently you're correct. During the last cycle, or prior to the adoption of the current housing element, we were able to provide information to HCD where we could count our ADUs as moderate units. And so again, that's some other specific guidance that we're expecting, which we've heard from HCD is intended to be in that guidance, how jurisdictions may be able to incorporate SB 9 units into their housing elements and at what affordability levels.
And let me ask one more before I go to Councilmember Risto. So you've provided us an emergency ordinance that we can pass tonight. So there's something in place in January. If we ask for many changes tonight, is it going to be difficult to pass that ordinance tonight? So we will not have something ready for January?
Thank you, Mayor. We would ask that any changes that are requested tonight are ones that are specific enough so that it can be incorporated into the ordinance. But also, as was previously mentioned, this is a 45-day urgency ordinance. We will be coming back. I believe we've got it tentatively scheduled for February 1st to come back to you at that point. And so if there are items that you would like staff to look into or consider, that is also another option.
All right, let me go to Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. I apologize if I'm asking any questions that were covered in the staff report. One speaker brought up something about property tax, which may not be germane to this issue, but I was just curious, with a lot split, presumably those become two different properties. Does that decrease the property tax on, for example, if somebody had a home on a lot and they split the lot, so the vacant lot is now going to be developed, does that reduce the value in the property tax of the remaining home on the smaller lot now, or are those reassessed?
Thank you, Vice Chair. So that is not known. I've also asked questions of a number of folks about how this potentially impacts the underlying property and their mortgage. Obviously, the title company is going to have to sign off on that. What I would say is it would depend on the circumstance. Because most of the property tax is tied to the structure. So there would be some incremental decline for the land valuation. And so for a single family home, and then you'd be getting potentially, with the new lot, you'll get additional structure or structures, which may or may not balance that out. We don't have any objective data on that though.
Okay, thank you. And then, let me see, so many questions. I think the suggestion by at least one of the speakers and maybe in some of the letters we've received talk about trying to do deed restriction. And I think I asked this of staff earlier and it's been mostly covered, but I think we want affordable units. We know how hard it is to get the low and very low. My concern with trying to put a strong deed restriction on all of these units is that in 2014, when I was on the Housing Element Advisory Board, at that point, ADUs were not by right. Those had to go through hearings. And at that point, we had two levels of ADUs that we had proposed. One was the regular one, and the other was if it were deed restricted, all fees would be waived. Now, in this case, what we're proposing, of course, is that everything built has to pay fees. So I guess I'm asking, do you see that there would be a conflict if we're requiring somebody to pay all the fees to construct something and then putting a deed restriction on it?
So again, that's going to be something that's going to have to be analyzed further in a nexus study or some other instrument. I think the program we have now is that we waive the application fee for ADUs if you want to deed restrict it. And so that is something that could be an incentive to encourage SB9 units to do that. We haven't had anyone take us up on that opportunity. So we may need to look at modifying that incentive program because the fees in the grand scheme of things aren't all that much for the BMP application. So it's not much of an incentive. There may be some other things that we need to look at moving forward. Once we have a general plan and housing element, those will probably be things that we'll want to reevaluate and see if there are some other opportunities that may be more of an incentive for folks to take advantage of that opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And then one further question, which maybe I can answer if I think about it harder. I'm assuming what we're looking at is if there's a lot split, that second unit constructed would be a for sale unit, and presumably anything built on the same parcel, you can't sell both units separately if they're on one parcel. Would the second unit be a rental?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. So it's going to be different depending on what the scenario is. From my recollection, if someone just does a 2-unit housing development, for instance, on a single family lot, you have an existing house and you want to do an additional unit and call it an SB9 unit, then those don't have to be separately conveyed. But if someone does an urban lot split, they are able to set it up where they both can be sold.
Thank you.
All right, Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you. I wanted to come back to the ADU question, and I had two questions there. One is, to what extent do the ADUs that would be created under SB 9, would they follow the same requirements as our current ADU requirements in terms of height, things like setbacks and things like that? Or is it an entirely new set of guidelines for these ADUs?
Thank you, Council Member. These, the second units that would be allowed under the 2-unit residential development application would not be considered accessory dwelling units. It would be 2 primary dwelling units, could be 2 attached units or 2 detached. They would not, based on the current draft urgency ordinance, they would not be considered ADUs and would have the restrictions laid out in this urgency ordinance rather than being covered under the ADU regulations. This also would mean that they would not have the additional 10% bonus as currently written in the draft ordinance for floor area.
So in the draft ordinance, there are no ADUs. Is that correct?
Correct. The way that it is currently presented would not allow accessory dwelling units to be built on lots developed under this urgency ordinance.
Okay. And then also in the staff report with regard to ADUs, it refers to, on page 2, it says, market analysis predicts the uptake will be limited in part because homeowners already have many of the same rights under ADU law. What's the source of this market analysis? Can that be provided to the council?
So there have been some studies that have been done over the summer before this was adopted and signed into law. So there is some additional available information. The idea behind it is the fact that on any single family residential lot right now, they are allowed to have up to 3 units. You can have the primary unit, the accessory dwelling unit, and a junior ADU. This would, if the property is subdivided, allow up to 4 units because you could have 2 houses on each of the subdivided parcels, resulting parcels.
Well, I asked a question about whether that information could be provided to the council.
We can provide that information when we come back with after the near the end of the 45-day period. We could bring that additional information, that report.
Are you referring to the report from Berkeley, the Turner report?
Yes, that's correct.
That's an industry organization. We're going to need some more independent, objective views. That's an organization that signed on in support of SB 9.
So that's not, is that a,
that's not
really
a question, but it's a
Yeah.
point that we're going to need some market information that's objective, in my opinion. I hope that staff will find a way to provide that.
Okay. Do you have further questions, Councilmember Hudis?
So I have a question about overall scheme of things here. How would this SB 9 ordinance apply to 1 to 12 lots that are proposed in the draft general plan? So in a typical 0 to 5 lot today, if the zoning is changed to 1 to 12, and then SB 9 is stacked on top of that, would that then permit more than 8 units, not 4, on a two-unit single-family residence today? That, in other words, in the draft general plan, it provides for rezoning to 112. So we would go from a typical 8,000 square foot minimum lot to 2,400 square foot. And then would SB9, as this ordinance is drafted, then say we could put 2 units on each of those 2,400 square feet lot?
Thank you, Council Member. I guess there are a few parts of that question. One is the question about what changes might be part of the implementation of changes as a result of the draft general plan and increases in density in our residential zones. At this time, we don't know that there would be any changes to the minimum lot sizes in our residential zones. The lot sizes may stay the same, just with the increased density, there may be some of those parcels that could now have 2 or 3 housing units allowed by the density from the general plan. But until that is adopted, of course, we don't know what those rules will be. And we will quite quickly after the general plan is adopted, then come through the process for updating the zoning ordinance, and that will be discussed at that time. And also at that time, we could look at how that would interact with the SB9 regulations. But at this time, we're not proposing any change to the minimum lot size in the zoning designations. And it looks like Director Paulson may have something to add.
Yeah, I know it gets challenging because there's so many things going on with the ADUs versus the SB9 versus the draft general plan versus the existing general plan. So for the ADUs and the SB9, SB9 allows up to 4 units irrespective of your density. So an SB9, you can limit to up to only 4 units. And so regardless of anything that would have changed in the general plan, if someone came in under SB9 as currently drafted in the ordinance, they wouldn't be allowed more than 4 units on 2 lots if an urban lot split was proposed.
I'm having trouble following that the minimum lot size wouldn't change if we went to a 1 to 12.
So, Councilmember Hudas, if I could interrupt for a moment, I want to try to keep us on point, which is getting through an urgency ordinance, which holds us over so we can have a more detailed discussion of what an SB9 ordinance should look like, at which time it would make more sense to maybe start thinking about how it would interact with a general plan that's not completed either. But at this point, it seems a little premature to go too far in depth there. We're just trying to get something in place so that we can do a more detailed look at all of this. Maybe I would suggest thinking about things that would lead us to information you might want to have when we have the next discussion about SB9. What kind of information would you like to be brought back to help us at that point in the future?
Yeah, if I could just chime in, I think that's exactly the issue is what other objective standards, designs, and subdivisions can we put in place? And I think one of the things is as staff, we've got to do additional research on Los Altos. I was just looking it up, and they do in fact have deed restrictions in their urgency ordinance. However, there's already been some challenges to that. So I can follow up on that, but we could follow up. So I think what staff is really looking at is what are the other issues for objective standards that we can place. And I think most of that has to be done with looking at what some of the other jurisdictions are doing.
So Councilmember Hudas, I apologize for interrupting, but I'm trying to get us kind of back on track. So go ahead.
I had some questions on some other potential areas for objective standards. One is on the fire hazard exclusion. And so there's language currently in the draft ordinance. And my question for the town attorney is, what's your legal confidence that the fire hazard exclusion qualifies as having a specific adverse impact?
I'm in
And I
support.
can jump in.
Okay, I'm in support of the language is in there. I'm not going to give you my legal opinion in open session so that it can come back later and hurt us. But I'm in support of the urgency ordinance as it's written.
To Councilmember Hudis, it's the first component of that section. It's language that ties back to SB 35. It's really the second part where it doesn't actually exclude very high fire hazard severity zones. We've gotten some pretty recent guidance on that. That next section that talks about building code and fire safety. All of the projects in the very high fire hazard severity zone have to meet the building and fire codes that are in place. There's also some language around Public Resource Code 4290, which is currently being modified by the Board of Forestry, that has some limitations. But the reality is that it's not going to be a very big obstacle for folks to meet that second portion of that reference from the code.
So in other words, that means that all that language about not allowing SB9 in very high fire hazard areas, which is a large percentage of Los Gatos, is essentially overruled or annulled by the fact that if they comply with building codes, that completely goes away. Is that correct?
That's our understanding. Ultimately, like you said, building code, fire code, defensible space, they've got to meet all of those requirements. Public Resource Code 4290 talks about access, but some of the modifications they're currently looking at look like they're going to open the opportunities up even wider because they are considering changing what types of projects would have to comply with PRC 4290 in relation to access and secondary access. So that is the challenge. I know if you look at I shouldn't say all, look at a lot of the publications and how this was communicated to the public, most people thought we were going to be able to not have to include the very high fire hazard severity zone. But in looking back to the specific language and the guidance we've received thus far, and most recently, it doesn't look like it's as big of an obstacle as everyone thought.
And I will add that the language that is in this urgency ordinance is directly from SB9, the exclusion that is allowed through that state regulation.
Okay, well, I guess the question I have is, and that's why I was trying to get an answer to whether we were going to be able to rely on that, is what about using language similar to what Santa Barbara has adopted with, that basically says that in their very high fire hazard zones, that the SB9 subdivisions will not be permitted. And they cite other ordinances that they have that make it clear that there are public safety issues in those areas. Have we looked at that?
I have not reviewed Santa Barbara's. I'm sure the town attorney has not reviewed Santa Barbara's. That is something we will take a look at and see if there's anything that might be helpful. If they have completely separate rules as it relates to fire safety, then that would be an effort that we would have to undertake to potentially be able to implement that. I don't know if that's something they had in place prior to SB9 or whether they're relying on some other information, but we can definitely
They adopted two ordinances in concert with their urgency ordinance. And they were then able to say that that the SB9 development would not be allowed in wildfire hazard zones.
Yeah, we can take a look at that, but we don't have that information currently.
Okay.
Anything further for right now, Councilmember Hudis?
No, I have other questions, but I definitely want to hear from other people too.
Okay. Before we go on, let me give Mr. Jeans another opportunity to see if his technology is working. Ms. Neese, if you could promote Mr. Jeans again.
Can you hear me this time?
We can. Hooray.
I went to a different computer.
Okay.
Thank you. Jennifer, can you throw up that screen that I had? I put a slide in somewhere. Okay, thank you. So I went through kind of line by line, and these were things that leaped out at me. One on page 3, section 3 under definitions, single family residential zone. I think that should include Hillside Residential, as this is single family. I can't see that as a multifamily zone. So I think you need to change the definition as part of this urgency ordinance. I then had the comment on exclusions, which you have already addressed. The floor area ratio lot coverage, you should clarify with or without the ADU square foot allowance. And in fact, Jennifer has already said it's without the ADU allowance. Also, you've got to allow one additional 800 square foot residence to be built, even if the existing home is already at the allowable FAR. I don't think that is covered within the ordinance. You may want to add that. Setback requirements, not quite so critical. This is a distinction that I think you want to make between rear parcels. You may not want in a flag lot, you may not want to have them have the full front setback. I suggested an option there. Tenancy, occupancy, primary residence, a homeowner exemption identifies primary residence. That might be too limiting. And another way to determine that might be with something like a utility statement. I think should strike the word only on section 5D4, denial. Corridor lots, I think having a 20-foot fee title corridor is excessive. I think you should have an alternative statement such as an access corridor or easement necessary to satisfy Santa Clara Fire County access standards shall be provided to the rear parcel of any flag lot. If you insist on a fee title corridor, drop it to 15 feet because only 12 feet is needed for Santa Clara County Fire. The next one, lot lines being at right angles to streets, is too restrictive on irregular lots. If you added something like or parallel to existing lot lines, that would make it easier for the engineering department to approve or approve the split configuration. There are some other minor ones, but I'm out of time, that I think you may want to look at. The intent to occupy, I agree with David Weissman. The 3-year limitation should also say or certificate of occupancy in case there's a construction project. That is a problem in SB9. SB9 does not take this into account. I think you can. The rest are minor. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Jeans? I don't see any hands, so thank you. I'm glad that we were able to get you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to now close public comment. I didn't formally close it before as we were having technical difficulties. So I will now close public comment and come back to council members. Councilmember Sack, did I get your questions in?
Yes, I just wanted to respond to your comment that that the purpose of tonight was really to solicit questions from council members for staff to then further either do research or ask HCD. I just wanted to clarify that if staff could really ask HCD how it is we can restrict, either do a deed restriction or put affordability limits on some of these rentals, if they are in fact going to rentals, that would be appreciated. I think there's so many questions as evidenced by the questions we're asking, but I know for me, the logistics of how to make these units affordable in a way that does not inhibit construction and further continues our work towards affordability and getting to those lower limits would be appreciated.
All right, thank you. Don't see any other hands up. Councilmember Hudas, did you want to ask more questions?
Yes, please. One was related to the historic districts, and which is a little clearer in SB3, but I'm wondering, is there any reason that we couldn't include R1D as historic? The description of R1D is the single family residential downtown zone applies to areas adjacent to the central business district, generally developed in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The R1D zone provides a means to preserve and rehabilitate architecturally and historically valuable structures and neighborhoods.
Thank you, Council Member. The draft ordinance was written to base the historic definition on what is defined as historic property that goes through historic review under our current code. And the SB9 language does state that historic properties as adopted by ordinance by the town can be excluded. And so the language that we currently have in our code does include all properties that are pre-1941. And so that does actually exclude a significant number of those R1D lots, but those that have been removed from the inventory by the HPC or were built more recently and are not in a historic zone would not be restricted and prevented from participating in the SB9 type permits.
Okay, so is it the staff's position that R1D could not be considered historic?
If it's not pre-1941, yeah, if it's not pre-1941 and it's not in a historic district, which many of our R1D is in a historic district, then it cannot be excluded. As Ms. Armour said, we're going a step further and including what we include in our historic resource inventory, because we do have a section of R1D that is north of Highway 9, for instance, that is not in a district. But most of the rest of the R1D south of Highway 9 is mostly in historic districts currently.
Well, there's also R1D on Los Gatos Boulevard as well.
There is limited R1D on Los Gatos Boulevard. That is true.
Okay. I had another question about the minimum living area. The draft calls for 150 square feet as a minimum living area. Is that realistic? And it seems to me that even our very low income is more around 400 square feet. The SB9, I don't think demands a minimum, but the 150 number, I'm curious where that comes from. It seemed to be hard to put in a bathroom and a kitchen and a living space in 150 square feet.
Thank you, Council Member. We do not anticipate that there would be many at the 150 square foot size. This actually was based on other draft urgency ordinances that we have seen by other communities, and that just to put something in there to provide a minimum size. The 150 is what we placed. Director Paulson may have something to add.
And that's one we just want to make sure someone didn't try to build, 150 is very small, but I think that links probably back to some building code requirements. And so if that's something that council is interested in striking, that's something that we can strike very easily. We have to allow 2 800 square foot minimum units regardless. So we don't anticipate folks are going to go down, much below that unless they choose to.
Okay. I wanted to come back to a couple of questions that were raised by some of the speakers. So Hillside Residential, is there, are we required to include Hillside Residential? It seems like it's excluded in the draft ordinance.
So we currently don't allow it in the draft ordinance, council member. That's correct. We took a strict interpretation as to SB9, which said single family residential zones. We have 2 of those, the R1 and the R1B. So we did not include the Hillside Residential. We may get some feedback that we may not be able to be that limiting, but we wanted this, again, as Mr. Schultz has mentioned before, as kind of the starting point that we're going to come back in 45 days and have another conversation and then talk about the potential of either extending it pursuant to the allowed timeline of 10 months and 15 days or going a different direction. But that's where our starting point was. We may get some challenges on that.
Okay. And another question about, that was raised by Dr. Weissman. It was the second question about whether it's possible to put in an affidavit that's stronger than what we have currently in the ordinance. I've seen some draft language that talks about the specific kind of affidavit, and for that affidavit of occupancy to be based on the certificate of occupancy. Does staff have an opinion on whether it's possible to do that, especially on new units?
Thank you. I think I spoke to this briefly before, but yes, we think you probably can add language in the instance where someone does an urban lot split and doesn't plan to do construction of any new units. They plan to sell the lot for someone else to take that effort on. They would theoretically already be in a house there that has occupancy, so that's fine. I think Mr. Jeans also had something up about recordation of a lot or 3 years from occupancy. So that's going to be kind of a case-by-case basis. But again, there's not really any teeth in requiring them to be there for 3 years, but that is some language we can definitely add.
Yeah, I can pass on some language that I've seen from some other municipalities on that one.
That'd be helpful.
I think those are the questions I have now. One other question, if I may, on the exceptions on page 7. This calls for exceptions to be reviewed by the community development director. Is it possible for exceptions to be reviewed by the planning commission rather than at a ministerial review? It seems to me that by right is by right. That means it complies with all of the requirements. If something goes beyond the requirements and goes into an exception, is there any reason why that would still have to be handled at a ministerial review?
Thank you, Council Member. You're correct. It is required to be a ministerial process, and there are elements in the SB 9 regulations that state that if any of our objective standards would preclude construction of an 800 square foot unit, that it needs to be allowed, that even those objective standards cannot prohibit the construction of 2 800 square foot units or subdivision of a lot. And so that in those cases, it still needs to be a ministerial process. And so we have it here as the community development director, because the 2 new permits, ministerial permits that are laid out in this urgency ordinance are going to be reviewed through the community development department.
And I would just add that SB 9, the state law doesn't allow it to go to a discretionary body for a hearing.
Yeah, but that means if it meets requirements, correct? If it doesn't meet requirements and requires exceptions.
No. So SB 9 specifically
says the
says
town attorney on this point, because
I would suggest that's another one that we can look at in the next 45 days and see the exact language in SB 9. I'm not ready to make a decision right off the cuff here without knowing that was an issue that you're concerned with, but I understand your issue when they're seeking, when they don't meet all the objective standards, and a determination is going to be made on whether, as Ms. Armour stated, on whether it can prevent construction of an 800-foot unit, whether that appeal or decision is made by the community development director or is made by planning commission. We can look into that and see if that is possible. I don't think it is, but I'm not ready to make that determination, yes or no, without looking at it more in detail.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all for now?
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Risto, you had your hand up a while ago. Did all your questions get answered?
I think my questions got answered. Thank you. I have one question about the 800 square feet. So it sounds like SB 9 is requiring approval of pretty much anything up to 800 square feet. Does that mean if somebody's building something larger that meets the FAR, there would be hearing, or it would not be ministerial?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. The way that this urgency ordinance is currently drafted, it would allow these applications to go through the ministerial process as long as they are meeting the objective standards that are listed here. So for example, if we have an existing single family residential lot where the existing home is less than the maximum allowed floor area, say they have 1,000 square feet remaining within their maximum FAR, they would be allowed to build a 1,000 square foot second house or attach it to make it into a duplex within this ministerial process. The situation that we were talking about is if the existing house, for example, has already at the maximum FAR, they still would be allowed to build a second house, but at that point it would be limited to the 800 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so let's see if we can come to conclusion here. The suggestion is to pass an urgency ordinance for the next 45 days. We've given lots of direction on things we'd like to discuss for a permanent ordinance. So the question for council members at this point would be, would you like to try to modify anything simple in the proposed urgency ordinance before passing it, or would you like to try just pass as is and work on the next ordinance? I would remind you the next council meeting is going to be in 28 days, so a good part of your 45 days will already be up by the time we even have our next council meeting. Any thoughts from council? Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. I'm inclined to, first of all, I appreciate the huge amount of work that staff did putting this urgency ordinance together. I realized that was a lot to pull together and we're still learning about it. I'm inclined to approve it as written, and the only change I would propose is that the occupancy clock starts at, or that the 3-year, okay, I'm sorry, I'm a muddle brain at the moment. The 3 years starts at occupancy and not at approval of a lot split or of approval of the building. Is that something that would be easily added at this point?
Yes, we would be able to add that.
Okay, so then if I may, I'm going to move to approve adoption of a 45-day urgency ordinance to implement Senate Bill 9 to allow for 2-unit housing developments and urban lot splits in all single-family residential zoning districts. And the one change that I would propose is that the 3-year occupancy requirement begin with approval of the occupancy permit.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Sayak.
I'll second the motion and second the comments as well. I know that there are still a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions that we've posed to staff today. I think a lot of those hopefully can be answered by HCD as they provide more guidance. What I would just ask, and it does not have to be in the motion, is as staff does receive information, I think given the level of interest that the council members as well as the community members have, if that could be shared in some just written form so that we can keep abreast of what changes and guidance has been given, and we can learn as we go, as this seems to be somewhat complex and convoluted, trying to make this match with our existing policies as well as all the other existing legislation that has already been passed. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any further comments from council members? Councilmember Hudis.
Yeah, I appreciate the work that staff has done, but I do feel like we are doing this with a gun to our head. Many other communities started work on this in October, held hearings with their planning commission, explored a number of these issues, including affordability, and explored topics having to do with fire hazard safety, explored issues around owner occupancy and other things. And so I am not quite there on supporting the motion. I think that we need to make more progress on the area of affordable housing. I would be prepared to propose an amendment to address that for 45-day. Obviously, we would have an opportunity to come back to that, but I think it's a grave disservice to the intent of the law and the intent of residents of Los Gatos to create more affordable housing, to pass an ordinance that does nothing to control the type of housing that gets built. At the state level, the state fell down on this and put no affordable housing requirements into SB 9, so that the only things that can get built are what the market forces will allow. And so I would be very uncomfortable in moving this forward without some language about affordable housing. And there's 2 ways to go about it, I think. One would be to specify that any units that would be built would be low or moderate, as in our BMP ordinance, or to put sort of an affordable by design requirement that would not allow any units over a certain size, so that they would, by design, we would get smaller units built. I have a whole list of other things that I think are really important to be addressed within the 45 days. And I'm happy to go through those, but I would want to get a little more discussion from council members about whether they would be open to including some further language on affordability in the urgency ordinance.
So let me start with the maker of the motion, which was Vice Mayor Risto. Would you like to make any modifications to your motion or ask questions before trying to do so?
I'm kind of split. My initial inclination was this is an urgency ordinance, and I'm a little worried about putting too much together tonight at the last minute. Although I suppose if we make it overly restrictive and there's challenges, we would just have to alter that restriction at the end of the 45 days. I have a question for staff. I mean, what would be potential consequences if we're overly restrictive tonight? And would we have to change it before the 45 days are over, or would we just have to take that into account when we go to a more permanent ordinance?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. I'll start by saying that there is a section in the urgency ordinance that makes any part that is invalid severable, but it looks like the town attorney also has something to add.
Know that, and any time we can come back. I mean, it doesn't have to be 45 days. This urgency ordinance, I believe, will probably see maybe 4 or 5 times this year, with changes as we learn and see what other jurisdictions are doing. It certainly looks like there's a couple groups that have already threatened to sue Los Altos, but if you want to put language in there, and we'll see, you could certainly put additional language in there.
Okay, and then as a follow-on, I mean, I think if we're doing the right thing, I don't think we should be guided by a fear of a lawsuit. On the other hand, what would be the outcome of that? Would the suit be just a requirement to change the ordinance, or would the suit have?
Yeah, I would say it was
financial.
It was unconstitutional and not in keeping with state law, and you'd be subjected to the attorney's fees.
Okay. I don't really want to see our town spending a lot of time in litigation. I'm not necessarily inclined to accept these changes, but I would like to hear from the seconder of the motion or the mayor.
And let me suggest possibly, and staff can tell me if I'm wrong, requiring it to be affordable is probably the problem, because it creates it to be so it can't be built is the concern. Councilmember Hudas mentioned in his statement, he said, or affordable by design. In other words, requiring a maximum size that could occur, at least for the emergency ordinance. And we know we have to be at least 800. So to try to find a median ground here, if you set a maximum size, that would force it to be more affordable because it's smaller, and it probably is not as legally risky. Am I right, Mr. Schultz? Maybe.
Yes.
Anybody else like to comment on this? I don't see any hands, so I guess it's still in your. Okay, we'll let Mr. Hudas go ahead and comment then before we decide if we're changing the motion or not.
Yeah, so I feel strongly that moving forward without creating any opportunity for affordable housing to be built, and only even in the next 45 days for applications that could come in for essentially market rate luxury housing that does absolutely nothing. And I understand that we have a very short time in tonight's meeting to wrestle with these things, but that's somewhat of our own doing. As I said, many municipalities started earlier. So I would respectfully suggest that we adopt an affordable by design measure and limit the size to 1,000 square foot maximum. This has been done, and the affordability criteria have been done by Santa Barbara, Seaside, Los Altos, Sonoma, a number of other municipalities. And I think if we need to take tonight and pass something and the language isn't 100% correct, and if staff can look at some of these other municipalities and even bring back a modification in a few weeks, if that's something we need to do, I would feel much more comfortable about getting us started on the right foot on this. Just because we started late doesn't mean we can't do the right thing. And so I think the right thing involves getting some affordable housing built out of SB 9. It certainly has the potential in SB 9 of causing a sacrifice on the part of our long-term residents. And I think we should get something back for that sacrifice. And I think that would be to limit the maximum size built to 1,000 square feet.
Okay, I see hand up from Councilmember Sack.
Yes, thank you. A question to staff and then a comment. The question is, what is the maximum size that we allow of ADUs that are by right? Is it 1,200?
That's correct. Well, an ADU can be allowed up to 1,200 maximum. There are cases where there isn't enough floor area allowed, and so it could be restricted to smaller than the 12,000. But regardless of what FAR is allowed, the ADU can never be more than 1,200 square feet.
Okay, and so my question then to staff, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put some parity rather than to what we're trying to design tonight, rather than just throwing out numbers. If we were to look at trying to emulate it similar to our ADU so that it's a maximum of 1,200, understanding that there may be some FAR restrictions as well because of the primary accessory, would that be something that could be doable because there's already an existing program?
Yes, I think that is perfectly fine to add something along those lines, and directly tying it to existing regulations probably makes it more defensible.
Okay, and then my second question.
We need to change.
Sorry.
That's okay, go ahead.
No, so that was what I was thinking, was we have an existing program so that it's something that we can easily point to, and it's not something that we're just creating on the fly. But my second question is, by any chance, do we follow with the ADUs that we have been creating what those price points are? So that, again, trying to figure out if there's some data we can use within our own town of smaller units creates more affordable price?
We do not follow or require them to provide us information on what those are actually rented for.
Okay. So those were my questions. And so for my colleagues, I'm looking at, as you've heard, more 1,200 as a maximum, or something smaller depending on what the primary unit is. Again, what I'm looking at is trying to create this to match an existing program, which is our ADUs that have been in existence, that staff has already been working with, and that we have not been subject to any liability. So if there is going to be a motion, I'd be looking at something along those lines.
Let me go to Vice Mayor Risto, who is the controller of the motion currently.
Okay, I am inclined to accept the amendment with the square footage being 1,200 to comply with what we have for ADU. I just want to clarify, we're talking about the secondary unit. So if there's a lot split, the primary unit is not what we're talking about, correct? I guess that would be for the amender and the seconder.
I guess, yes, that is my understanding, because right now it's following the ADU program that has a primary unit attached to it.
Okay, that is my understanding of the intent, but I want to make sure that Councilmember Hudes was intending that.
Well, I didn't make an amendment, and my sense is it needs to apply to all the units, as it's been done in a number of other jurisdictions that I've mentioned, not just a secondary unit, but that any units built under this, and my proposal is 1,000 square feet. I could accept 1,200 if we can review a list of other areas that I think need to be explored within the next 45 days. But no, my following the lead of other municipalities, they put an absolute number on any units that are built under SB 9.
Oh, so I guess all right, I saw Councilmember Sack raise your hand again. Go ahead.
I just wanted clarification what that meant, that there's an absolute number against absolute unit number of how many dwellings can be built?
No, that the maximum size of any units that are built under SB 9 would be 1,200 square feet.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Councilmember or Vice Mayor Risto, so that is that, are you?
No,
are you
go ahead. I'd like you to weigh in, Mayor.
I'm okay with setting it at 1,200. I think the idea is there's a lot that already has a building on it, right? You don't change that lot. So you split the lot, and on the new lot, the maximum building size is 1,200 square feet. That's my understanding. I'm okay with that modification, if that's the modification you're making.
Okay, I'll make that modification to my motion.
Let's check in with staff. Do you have you figured out how to put this in the ordinance so that we can vote on it tonight? If we go ahead.
Thank you. My understanding of the motion that's being made and the modification specifically in relation to the unit size would be that any new units proposed through one of these new permits, so whether it's a 2-unit residential housing development application, so a second unit on an existing property, 2 new units on an existing single-family residential zone, or new units on a newly created lot split, that any residential unit created through these processes would be limited, that each be no more than 1,200 square feet.
That is correct. And I would just add that I would like to get, I hope staff can follow up on that and we can look at what other communities have done. So when this urgency ordinance is over, we can make some better decisions about whether that makes sense for all structures or if we want to modify that. But for right now, that's how the motion stands.
And I'll just double check with the seconder of the motion, Councilmember Sayak, that you accept that amendment.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Hudes, your hand is up.
Yes, will we have the opportunity, or is this the opportunity to talk about other things that we'd like to see when this comes back to us in the next 45 days?
I would say let's vote on this motion and then I will ask us to give additional input.
Okay, thank you.
So at this point, I will call the question on this motion. Councilmember Sayak.
Yes.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Yes.
And the mayor votes aye, so it passes unanimously with the four council members present. And I will then continue the discussion about other items we'd like staff to bring back to us for when we work on a permanent ordinance. Actually, before we do that, should I ask the clerk to read the title of the ordinance to get that over with?
Yes. An urgency ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos implementing Senate Bill 9 to allow for 2-unit housing developments and urban lot splits in all single-family residential zones.
Thank you. Councilmember Hudes, I believe you had some other items you wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to express these. I think that some of them are extremely important if we are going to consider this in the next 45 days, and then others would be things to consider later. And I'm happy not to dwell on the later items. I'm happy to send them into staff, but the ones that I think are critical in the next 45 days is for us to look at additional language on restricting the units to low and moderate. And I would point staff to Santa Barbara and Sonoma with that regard. And I would also like to look in a little more detail about whether we could include R1D in historic, or and how many units might get left out if or be included additionally if we made the change to R1D. I would like to see staff explore stronger language on the occupancy, on the affidavit of occupancy. One of the languages that I saw was the town shall require the applicant to sign and record an affidavit placing a covenant that will run with the land to confirm that the applicant will reside in one of the SB 9 units for 3 years from the town's grant of the application where a unit already exists, or if no unit exists, for 3 years from the town's issuance of the unit's certificate of occupancy. The other thing I would like to look at in more depth is the issue about fire hazard mitigation. Yes, the language appears to neuter the ability. However, a number of municipalities, including one that we look to often when in looking at our fire mitigation, and that's Santa Barbara and Montecito, they have adopted some ordinances that accompany their urgency ordinance that allows them, at least on the face of it, to exclude SB 9 division in fire danger areas. And also I would like to explore the evacuation routes that are part of considering fire safety, and whether SB 9 can restrict projects that are on an evacuation route, especially where the route is narrow and where we need to avert tragedies that occur. A lot of the tragedies occur when people are trying to escape from the fire. And so if we've created more density in those areas on evacuation routes, I think that's an area that we need to look at as well. I'd like to explore a building height restriction of 18 feet on the secondary units, and that I'd like to explore the possibility of giving notification to neighbors when an SB 9 application is there giving a, as we typically do with a 500-foot radius. The other items are things that I will send in that I don't think necessarily have to be addressed in 45 days. But, and I apologize to the council for taking so much time and going through this, but frankly, we should have been doing this 2-3 months ago, and then we would have had adequate time to get public input and legal advice on these things if we had gotten started. So those are some suggestions that I'd like to see addressed when we get this back.
All right, thank you, Council Member Sack.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for giving us the opportunity to just ask staff for further research and clarification on some of these items. I do want to just comment, though, for those that are paying attention, that a lot of the questions that are arising from today's discussion aren't necessarily because we didn't start the work 2 months ago. I just want to lay the context that we have been working on a general plan. We have been working on housing element and the day-to-day planning operations. And so the same staff that does a lot of this work are the same staff that has to do the research on this. And so I just want to put that out there, that we have not been doing this, not because we haven't had the time to do it, but also that as we wait for more guidance, I do believe that there's a lot of gray area still, and there's a lot of legal implications. And I'm quite confident that we're going to get through a lot of the complexities of this bill in the next 45 days, and perhaps even more so as more information comes out. So there's more information coming, so please pay attention, and we'll just stay on top of it. Thanks.
Thank you, and I think there's a thank you in there to staff for all the hard work. Any other comments on this, on item 20? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close item number 20 and bring us back to item number 2, which we skipped, which were minutes. So I think I will go straight to Councilmember Hudes. You had questions about the form of minutes from a special meeting or something of that sort. Oh, from a study session, yeah. Form of minutes from a study session.
Right, let me just go back to my notes on item 2. So my question is, we held this study session on December 7th. We held another study session earlier. Yet when you look at the minutes, there's only the comments from the public are listed. Will there be further documentation of the study session questions and answers in any format?
Thank you, Council Member, for asking the question. As you know, we record all of our study sessions, particularly for the Town Council. They are available on YouTube for the public to review at their convenience. So they're able to see all of the detail of the discussion and dialogue that happens. Per council policy and direction, we prepare action minutes, which is why there's just a very brief summary of the council discussion.
So a follow-up question on that is, how is it possible to have action minutes when there is a session where no action is permitted?
It's a term of art, and I apologize if it sounds a little bit wonky, but that's essentially the term of art in government, is that we are essentially just identifying what the major activities were during the meeting, and the major activity of this meeting was the discussion that was held by the council. And again, through our website, the public has easy access to the YouTube videos, or they can go directly to the YouTube website and access all of our meetings.
Well, I'm raising it as a concern about transparency. I think full transparency requires that either a summary minutes be posted when we're holding a study session, or the Q&A with the answers be posted on the website of the general plan. And a lot of other municipalities do this. Campbell held a hearing on their housing element in SB 9 in October. Palo Alto conducted a study session on this on a similar topic, and they posted minutes that you could read, and the answers are posted. So I am becoming more and more uncomfortable with approving minutes of a study session where the only comments are the ones from the public, and none of the answers from staff are posted, and and maybe even the council deserves a response to some of their questions. So I am just getting very uncomfortable with these minutes from study sessions that have no action in them. I wanted to convey that, and I would have trouble supporting a motion to approve these minutes.
And let me just offer for the town council that our town council policy committee will be considering its 2022 work plan in January. And this is a discussion topic that we would be happy to bring to the policy committee. And we would want to make sure we have consistent guidelines, because not only does the council have study sessions, but so do our other boards and committees. So that is a potential work plan item that we can consider next year. Thank you.
All right, so I think we've made the point. Would anybody like to make a motion to approve these minutes?
I think you have to go to the public, right? Since it is a
You're
public
right.
hearing.
Let me open that up. Would any members of the public wish to comment on this item? I don't see any hands raised, so I'll close public comment. Thank you for reminding me, former Mayor Sack. Vice Mayor Aristo, I think I saw your hand up.
Yes, I move to approve item 2 from the consent calendar, and just with a referral that the policy committee in 2022, as they're setting their priorities, take a look at the policy around minutes for study sessions.
Councilmember Sack.
I'll second the motion.
Any further comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. Councilmember Sack?
Yes.
Councilmember Hudes?
No.
Vice Mayor Aristo?
Yes.
And the mayor votes yes, so the motion passes 3-1. And with that, I believe we are finished. Unless somebody can remember something I've forgotten, we are finished and adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Good night.